Dalzell.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I knew my time was limited, so I've written out my testimonial. I have about 5 minutes, yes? Respected members of the Society for Psychical Research, I thank you for letting me speak, yes? My name is George Dalzell. I live in Hollywood, California, and I've come from the United States at my own expense to present 2 brief testimonials on behalf of the Scole Experimental Group, including my own testimonial. I am a licensed clinical social worker holding a bachelor's degree from Northwestern University and a master's degree in social work from Barry University. Presently, I work for the County of Los Angeles Department of Mental Health alongside licensed psychologists and psychiatrists in a multidisciplinary team of mental health professionals. I first became acquainted with the Scole Experimental Group after being invited to an experimental session at the home of Brian Hurst, a mentor to world-famous medium James Van Praagh, author of Talking to Heaven. Hurst lives in Reseda, California. I first met Brian in March of 1997, and I sat with the Scole Group on April 7th, 1997, only several weeks after meeting Mr. Hurst. Hurst invited me to sit with the Scole Group because I had expressed a desire to learn more about physical phenomena as well as mental mediumship. An important caveat to my testimonial is that on June the 10th, 1996, less than a year before sitting with the Scole Group, I had lost a friend, Michael Keller, 29 years old, in an auto accident which occurred in Frankfurt, Germany, in which drugs and alcohol had played a part. And I make this point because there's been some debate about anonymous spiritual people popping in and out of the Scole sessions, and I have a very distinct personality. In fact, this is a photograph. I passed this to Mrs. Barrington. On the evening of April the 7th, 1997, I entered a blacked-out room in Brian Hurst's home. There were just over 20 spectators present, including Hurst and a friend, Ramesh Jani. At the time of the sitting, I was sober and had not consumed any alcohol, prescription medication, or any mind or mood-altering substances. I cannot speak for the authenticity of all that was observed, and though it was astonishing to see a large table marked with luminous tabs appear to levitate autonomously and stand on its side, as well as a host of other physical phenomena, I remained skeptical and unable to say whether what I had witnessed was genuine until an event which occurred after the room began to be filled with lights of indeterminate source. For those who never sat with the group, I can best describe these small bluish-white lights as resembling fireflies, but with constant illumination and capricious locomotion. It was obvious to all that they were not fireflies, by virtue of their size and the nature of their movement. At this juncture, I decided to test the authenticity of the Scole Group silently and without verbally informing any of the sitters of my intention. Simply held out both of my hands in front of me, and I sent out the thought with my mind: send one of the lights to my right hand. Shortly thereafter, one spirit light flew from across the room and away from the vicinity of the 4 experimentalists and touched the index finger of my right hand. Because I was leaning forward, I could plainly see there was no fiber optic cord attached to the light, nor was it a projection of any kind. I can say with certainty that what touched me was a sphere of solid light. This event was witnessed by the spectators to my right and left and is documented on audio tapes belonging to Brian Hurst and the Scole Group. Not long after this event, I was singled out by Diana Bennett of the Scole Group and was asked if she could relay a message from a male spirit through the personality of Emily Bradshaw. I agreed, and what followed appeared to be a direct communication from the spirit of Michael Keller, whom I mentioned earlier, 29 years old, that passed in the automobile accident. Through mediumship, through Ms. Bennett, he identified himself to me evidentially as follows. Number 1, he identified me as a TV commercial actor. Well, now this is true because early in our association, Michael knew me as a commercial actor, an avocation prior to my vocation as a social worker. And it's important to note that I introduced myself to Hurst and the Scole Group as a social worker only. Number 2, he said that drugs and drink had been involved in his death, which is true. Upon autopsy, stimulants were found in Michael's bloodstream, and he voiced regret about his premature demise and the part he played in it, a fact unknown to Hearst or Diana Bennett, stating that, quote, the drugs he was taking heightened the mood, then it just tipped the balance of things. Number 3, he thanked me for prayers that I sent out at the time of his death, a fact unknown to anyone and uncharacteristic of me since I am neither dogmatic nor religious. Number 4, he sent out a message to his parents. Don't bother with the grave so much. There's a lot of tears every time they go, and that's not helping me go forward really, end quote. Another fact unknown to Hearst or Bennett was that Michael's parents at that time daily visited Michael's grave, sometimes going 2 or 3 times a day. These 2 experiences, the physical phenomenon, engendered by silently asking to be touched by a spirit life, and having the evidential mediumship facilitated by Ms. Bennett, leave me with absolute certainty that some of the communications with personalities in a discarnate spirit world made possible by the Scole experimental group constitutes watershed evidence of life after death. If I may continue with the second testimonial briefly and finish. This is a testimonial of Tricia Loar of Glendale, California. Dear members of the Society for Psychical Research, my name is Patricia C. Loar. I'm a longtime resident of Glendale, California. I have a master's degree in English. I've taught high school for 17 years before operating my own business. I neither drink, smoke, nor take drugs. I am of sound mind and body. Notice all these caveats because the phenomena was so extraordinary with the Scole experimental group for all of us who sat with him. I wish to tell you of 3 personal experiences I had on 2 different sittings I attended with the Scole group at the home of Brian Hearst in Reseda, California during April of 1997. I was a part of a group of 25 people, many of whom are well-known and trusted friends of mine, and some of these are pretty fantastic. The first experience I had involved a spirit light which the entire group saw dancing about in the room. I mentally asked the light to come and land on my open hand for me to examine. After about 10 minutes, it did so. I had the opportunity to fully examine this light. It was quite hard, rough, round, and no matter how I moved it around, the light seemed to come from whatever portion of the sphere was on top. There were no wires or threads attached to it as I felt all around. The second experience occurred during the second sitting and involved the same light. Due to an accident I had in 1980, I suffered a great deal of pain in my right leg. This small light entered my left ankle. This was witnessed by most of the group. She had problems with both her right leg and her left ankle. Once inside, it felt as if my ankle were being poked from the inside by a pencil eraser. Immediately after, I felt no difference in the pain. 2 days later, however, this long-standing pain vanished. To date, it has not returned. The final incident of personal encounter with spirit through the energies of the Scole group is the most amazing. It occurred during the end of the first sitting. It was a long sitting, and because of the physical problems that I've already mentioned, it is difficult for me to sit for long periods of time. As I tried to shift to a more comfortable position in my chair, I became unbalanced, extended my arm to steady myself, and in doing so, I encountered a small, clammy hand directly in front of me at waist height. I was startled to encounter this as we were asked not to reach out and grab at spirit. I was somewhat abashed. I moved my hand away from this contact, and in doing so, my hand inadvertently traveled up what felt like a very solid arm, clothed in long-sleeved garment, and all seemed normal until I reached the shoulder, and nothing else was there. Just space. I had encountered a spirit arm, and only an arm, moving about the room. In the course of learning about our world, we can only know definitely that which we experience with our senses. All other things we must believe. I must believe that the world is round, that there are polar ice caps, that man has landed on the moon. I know, however, that spirit fills the room with physical manifestations when the Scole group sits. I have heard them, seen them, touched them, and smelled them. I have no doubts about the absolute genuineness of these experiences. I have chosen to handwrite this letter so that you can be sure that it has not been altered in any way. I will provide you with that later, Ms. Barrington. If you have any further questions regarding my experiences with the Scole group, I shall be more than happy to accommodate you. Respectfully yours, Patricia C. Loar of Glendale.